Hey there and welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So now that the Broadband Data Collection deadline has passed for service providers to upload their information, and you can still upload that information if you haven't yet, now that the deadline has passed, the FCC has come out and said that they're going to open the challenge process for service providers, cities, entities, and other entities starting on September 12th. So I'll be talking about that. Be right back. Thanks for joining me. Again, Rick Uzzi here with Broadband Deployment News. So I wanted to let everybody know about this. So if you filed your information, this is important. If you haven't filed your information, this is still good to know that you can do this, because I know one of the things that yesterday I did a broadcast on Tech Tuesday about a survey that I did of internet service providers. We sent out bunch of emails to a bunch of contacts at different service providers. I got 41 responses back on how they were doing with their filing of their broadband service locations into the Broadband Data Location system. That's the FCC system that's collecting from every single ISP where they actually can provide service, not just who they're providing service to, but all of the addresses where they can provide service. So I talked about that yesterday. And I know that, looking at that survey, a lot of service providers were having some problems with that, through the process of how to format their data, but also matching the data and also the accuracy of the data. They were looking at and finding locations in the fabric that maybe weren't supposed to be broadband serviceable locations, or vice versa. They're seeing locations that they know they can serve that were not in the fabric. So that's what this process is for, because the FCC and CostQuest know that the information is not going to be exact. By the way, they had to put all of this together. So they know there's going to be issues, and they have this challenge process where people can go in and challenge this. So I will go ahead and link to this FCC page right here, where you can download a public notice about it, which has got more information. So just to look at that real quickly. So again, Broadband Data Task Force announces the start of the Broadband Serviceable Location Fabric bulk challenge process. They talked about this earlier, and they published a kind of a guide or a manual, which I'm going to look at here in a minute. But now is where they're saying, hey, you can start doing this. So you can see here, as of September 12th, state, local, and tribal governments, service providers, and other entities can begin to file bulk challenges to data in the Broadband Serviceable Location Fabric, or the Fabric. They did a webinar today on September 7th at 2 p.m. I'm sorry that I didn't do this broadcast prior to this webinar taking place, because then I would have let you know about it in advance. Hopefully there'll be a recording of it. It's not up yet. I did watch the webinar and got a little bit of information from it. It was very, very interesting in some places. Specifically, they had the guy from CostQuest, Jim Stegman, who's the president and CEO of CostQuest, showed some examples of how they would classify locations as broadband serviceable locations, and it was specifically some of the challenges with properties or plots that have more than one building, and how they then put that and put a dot on the map and said, okay, this is a location and this one is not. So he covered that. But there's obviously some issues as people ask questions at the end. They were like, hey, we've got all these, what they call them, cow sheds that yeah, supposedly, you could put broadband there, but we don't think the cows need broadband. So they're saying there were lots of locations that were listed as a broadband serviceable location that should not be. There were questions about anchor institutions, because for some reason anchor institutions, they say, are not broadband serviceable locations, because they figure anchor institutions and large enterprises don't get mass market broadband, so they would not buy their broadband from an internet service provider. I'm not sure why that's the case. I know we have a lot of our customers that are independent broadband service providers that are providing service to businesses in their area. That could be the local library, police station. So for them, that would be a broadband serviceable location, but yet in the fabric, it's not marked as that. It's marked as it's not being a broadband serviceable location. So there's issues like that. Other things that people brought up. So you can see here, we got the webinar. Again, I will post a link to the page where that hopefully will show up, their past events page. So I'm thinking in a few days, maybe by tomorrow, maybe later in the week, there will be a recording of that. So they did it. It showed up on YouTube. It was also on the FCC site. I'll link to the FCC site that has their past webinars, and hopefully that will be there in just a little while. The task force, OEA, and WCB previously issued detailed data specifications and formatting for submitting bulk fabric challenges in the BDC system. I went through that a while back when they did that. Once the BDC broadband maps are published later this year, members of the public will be able to view the maps and submit online challenges to the fabric data associated with an individual location using the map interface. So the first process, now that internet service providers are still uploading their data, but the FCC has said that they're going to kind of go through a rolling process of looking at these challenges. So once an entity uploads all their serviceable locations, if they haven't already, then they can go through the process of bulk challenges. The FCC is going to be looking at those and going through those. The maps that come out in November it sounds like they're not going to take into account any challenges. So, if a service provider says, hey, these are all wrong, we need to challenge these, they upload those. The FCC may agree with those challenges, but they're not, from what it sounds like, going to be reflected in the November maps. So, at that point, everybody, including consumers, can go in. A consumer can look at their individual address and they can challenge that at that point. Any challenges they were saying that take place now or that are submitted that are then accepted will only be reflected in the next version of the fabric, which is going to come out like on the last day of the year, because that will cover, or maybe the first day of the next year, because that's going to cover the next filing period. So they're supposed to file at the first of the year, and then, or maybe the last day of the month. They said December 31st. So the first of the year through June, that filing period, and then there's a June to the end of the year filing period. So the next time it sounds like the fabric will have these updates in it will be the next fabric. So this map that comes out in November, sounds like it's not going to be one that includes all of the challenges right now that internet service providers are going to be bulk uploading. Not just internet service providers, but as we saw, communities, tribal entities, other entities that can be challenging this data in a bulk format. What's this? Bulk fabric challenge specs, public notice, data specifications for the fabric challenge data. There's a link to that. I'll pull this up in a minute. So there's a link to the specifications, which is important, and how you're going to format that information. The challenge data must include, among other things, the name and contact information of the submitting entity, the fabric location subject to challenge, the category of the challenge for each location, and evidence supporting the challenge. Each bulk fabric challenge data file must include records for each location being challenged in a comma-separated value or CSV format. All fields must be included in the file upload. All values must conform to the descriptions, codes, formats identified for each field in the data specification document that we're going to look at here. So I think that's it in here. There's a little place in here for questions. That's basically a broadband help site where you can put in questions if you have them. So I will link to this document, and in this document there is a link to what I'm about to show you. Where is it? There we are. Link to this, which I'm about to pull up. There's a link to this help file here. You can read all through this. So the format. This is the data specifications and initial release. So it's still in the initial release. So there's an overview on here, and then it shows the various data that you have to provide in this challenge. So you've got the contact email address and phone of whoever it is that's providing or submitting this challenge. Then there's category codes, and these are very important. So this is where you're going to identify why you're challenging this particular location. So if you're challenging a location, you got to put a code for each location. Number one, missing broadband serviceable locations. So again, this could be, maybe this is where you're providing service to a library, and they don't have it as a broadband serviceable location because they say it's an anchor institution, and those are not, they figure they're not going to get mass market service, but certainly in small towns, that's not the case. So you might classify that as one and say this particular location is broadband serviceable. It could be that there's just an address that's wrong or something like that, and it's not showing up as a serviceable location. Then you got incorrect location primary address. Maybe the fabric says it's 125 and it's really 127, something like that. Incorrect location unit count. So if it's an MDU or MTU, apartment buildings, office buildings, how many units are in there? That could be wrong. You need to correct that there. Incorrect location building type code. I think there's the codes are further down in this document. Location is not within the footprint of the correct building. So that would be an example of where, again, you've got kind of a rural area, and you've got a house and you've got a garage, and maybe the location is on the garage and not on the house. So you would correct that. Location is not broadband serviceable. That would be a situation where, again, it's a cowshed, and the cows don't need broadband, so you would note that. Add supplemental addresses or address. So that could be, I think, for, a lot of times they'll have a primary address for an apartment building, but then there's each, certain, not necessarily an apartment building, but sometimes, yeah, it could be apartment buildings where each unit might have an address like 102, 103 Main Street, 104 Main Street, but yet there's a primary address for the building. So apparently there were two files in the Fabric. There were primary addresses, but then there was a secondary address file. So I think that's where that would go. Address primary, you got to put that in. City, state, simple stuff here, zip code suffix, unit counts. Again, that's, you're challenging that. Building type code, here's those codes. So is it business, residential? Is it both? Is it group quarters location, community anchor institution, or an enterprise location? So again, these last two, they tend to not flag as broadband serviceable locations. Then you've got a non-BSL code. These would be, if you're going to say something's not a BSL, you have to, I think, describe why. So the service is a K-12 school, it's a library or community anchor institution. It's a government building, also a CAI, what they call a CAI. Healthcare building, so there's lots of those community enterprise or community anchor institutions. It's an enterprise, doesn't lack any power or lacks power. No longer exists, so it used to be an address, but it's not anymore. The building's vacant or gone or whatever. BSL lacks address flag. So you'll have to look through some of these things. Latitude and longitude, you need to provide that. If you're going to say something's not marked on the map as a serviceable location, you're going to have to put in the latitude and longitude on that. And then also if you're moving something, so if the barn is marked, I think they would like you to be able to put in the actual place where it should go, although I don't know if everybody has the resources to do that. But in any event, there's a lot of help information on how to do this. So that's the guide and the format that you need to submit the file in a CSV file. Somebody asked in the webinar if this was available, and they said yes, and this is what it looks like. So they want to know, is there a matrix that talks about, what information is needed for different types of challenges, and that's what this is. So I will link to this page as well, and if you just click on that, it'll expand that to where you can actually read it, kind of. Just look over here and read it. So you've got the different field names over here on the left, and then you've got missing broadband serviceable location, that's category 1, and then if it's R, it's required. If it's N, they say null, which I'm assuming means null, meaning you don't need to include that information. Then you've got O is optional. So for example, on this missing broadband serviceable location, all of these things are required, like your name, email, phone, and your category code is required. The BSL lacks address flag is required. City and state's required. Optional would be zip code and zip code suffix. Then you've got some of these other requires down here, unit count. So you can see what's required. And then as a different example here, you've got location is not broadband serviceable. So you've got those same contact fields required. None of these are required. If it's not serviceable, they don't need the address or zip code or any of that. Required is the, whatever that is, non-BSL code, why it's not a BSL, really. So you need to say why. And you're supposed to document for each category. You're supposed to have backup as to why this is the case. You don't have to do it for each location. Somebody asked that question in the webinar. So what they were saying is for each category, if you're going to have location is not broadband serviceable, you need to, I guess, say why that's the case. And maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's a paragraph that you type in there that says, we surveyed these locations and discovered blah, blah, blah. I don't know exactly how that, you'll have to get into the system and do it, unfortunately. But that's the matrix there. And again, they did a webinar today. I was looking on this page. As soon as the webinar was over, I checked YouTube right after. And unlike my broadcasts that are immediately available as soon as I'm done via recording, theirs are not, okay? So I went back and it said this is not available. So I think they probably check it out. Need to see if they, if they need to have any issues. Maybe they don't want to put it right up there right away. So hopefully they will post it and it will be back on YouTube. But also I believe here's all the archived events. So the last one was August 30th. That's the last one that's up here. I don't know, when this was put up here. It might have been put up later in the day on August 30th or 31st or just a few days later. So for example, if you click here, you can then see that particular video. Again, this was on YouTube at the time. So I really expect that, go back here, I really expect that you will see this webinar appear here at some point in the next few days. So I will link to this page, and if it's not available at the time, if you're watching this now and look for it later, as soon as I'm done here, I'll post this. Or if you're watching this in a few days from now, you can go there, just, bookmark this or something, this page, and go back there later and see if it's available, because it is, I think it would be really helpful. They talk about the process. Again, Jim Stegman goes through the Cost Quest thing and how they did things, and they talked about various scenarios, and then they took a lot of questions. And I think the questions might be the most helpful, because they might be the same kinds of questions that you have, and those get answered. And it might prompt some other questions that you have. And you can always still ask questions. Go to the help site. There's a place where you can ask questions there, so on the FCC site. So let's see if there's anything else that I want to mention here. Yeah, I talked about the anchor institutions, wrong addresses, zip codes. Yeah, so basically, yeah, they mentioned, in some cases, some people ask, why aren't the addresses matching? I'm having a hard time. Some said, I'm having a hard time because I got lots of addresses that are not showing up. And they were like, well, sometimes the town names are different, and, maybe they're called different things, or you might have complete zip code issues, those kinds of things, where that would be a large number of addresses that are not available, or that didn't seem to be right. So there was information like that was provided that I think would be very helpful. So again, this is the start of the challenge process starting on September 12th. So you can review this information and then decide what you want to report if you find that there are serious issues in this. And I would certainly recommend doing a challenge if you find that you've got addresses that are wrong, because we want to get this information as up to date as possible and correct. But again, it sounds like the first maps that come out will not reflect any challenges. I think that's going to be a first cut of here's what it looks like, and the service providers would have already sent their challenges in, and then the consumers will have a crack at it at that point. When the FCC maps come out, consumers can go to their address and they can challenge that for one reason or another. And really, as I mentioned yesterday when I was, I think, talking about this, the consumers are probably not going to be able to challenge speeds. If the service provider says they're offering symmetrical gig service, and a customer runs a speed test and it's not quite a gig, it's 800 by 700 or something like that, that could be associated to their wireless connection, the in-home network. Could be all kinds of things. It could be just congestion on the network at that time. It could be home network congestion. It could be congestion on the service provider's network. That could cause that. So it's not always like that, but the service providers are uploading their maximum advertised upload and download speed for each location. And then obviously if there are serious discrepancies and there are a lot of challenges from people in an area that's saying this service provider is not doing this, then those I'm sure will be addressed. But it's going to be more about, I think, can I get service at this address as the service provider says I can, and is this information correct as far as what they say they're offering? I think that's going to be the primary kinds of challenges that consumers will be doing, unless, again, there's a serious discrepancy on what the service provider is saying they are doing and what the consumer is getting. And that's a concern of a lot of people, because, is the service provider going to be upfront because they want to make sure that that somebody else doesn't get funds to overbill them, but they need to be honest too. So really where this is going to be coming into play are those areas that are kind of on the cusp, where the service provider, maybe they have DSL and they're trying to do 100 by 20, and it's not easy because of distances. So some customers may get that, but the further you get out with DSL, then the slower the speeds get. So there could be challenges based on that as you get on these situations where that really should be an area that should be getting funding, because it's again, it's kind of on the cusp, and it really should, if they can get funding for fiber there, somebody can get funding for fiber there, then they want to do that. But really, if that's the case, if let's say it's a DSL provider, they should be applying for funding there. They should say, well, we've got DSL in this area. It's it's kind of expensive for us to serve it, especially as we get out to these longer distances with fewer customers, and they should go ahead and submit to get funding for that so they can upgrade their plant to fiber. So hopefully that's all how it's going to work. We'll have to see. Thanks for joining me. If this was helpful, if you would, give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not. Click the subscribe button, click the little bell, and you'll be notified when I'm live. Thanks a lot. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.